Thank you all for coming to our session on healthy watershed governance and organizing models. We're really excited to have such a wonderful group of people who've joined us for this conversation, including our panelists. And then I know there's a ton of expertise and experience in the room, so thank you for taking the time to join us for this conversation. I am Maddie Nyblade. I'm an assistant professor at SUNY ESF in Environmental Studies, and also the co-faculty director of the Center for Native Peoples and the Environment. And my co-conference coordinator is Tess.
Hi everyone, Tess Clark. I'm with Syracuse University, where we house an environmental finance center that focuses on how to solve the difficult how to pay problem of environmental protection in EPA Region 2. Just here to back up Maddie, get us going.
And has been a huge help. I wanted to first acknowledge that we are on the homelands, contemporary and ancestral homelands of Onondaga Nation, the Central Fire of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Folks at Onondaga have been very much a part of these conversations, and they have and continue to be the original stewards of Onondaga Creek Watershed that we are in currently. They are currently in ceremony right now, so they weren't able to join us. But they are part of these conversations, and let's keep them in mind as we have and learn from our panelists and have a conversation as a collective group. So the session goals for today are really learning about how different watershed or lake associations come together and organize to take action to care for the waterways which they live, in the watershed they live within, and explore structures or initiatives and projects where different government agencies, local organization, community groups come together to really care for shared waters. And this really came from work to organize around Onondaga Creek Watershed. We hosted a meeting in February to restart conversations about all of the work around caring for Onondaga Creek that has happened in the watershed. And this came from several grants that we were trying to write and didn't get funded. And so we just decided to have a meeting. And then we were blown away by the number of people who came to the meeting, shared, and we heard from all of you that we wanted bigger platform to share and continue to talk about governance models, but also spaces to engage the public more directly and bring in the voices that we were missing at that February meeting. And so this is a part of that work, and we'll continue to do that work with a more public-facing event on June 3rd, which we're very excited about as well, at the Bob Cecil Community Center at 5 to 7 on June 3rd. So if you're around, we'd love to have you for that as well. And hopefully these conversations today can help inspire the work that happens at Onondaga Creek Watershed, but we're also really open to thinking about organizing models at other watersheds and what we can learn to bring here and what we can share from the work that's going on in this watershed with other watersheds.
Okay. All right, so just a few logistics about how this session will go. We're going to have some opening remarks from Stephanie Johnson with Onondaga Environmental Institute to remind us of where we've been with Onondaga Creek and where we hope to go. And then we're going to hear from a number of watershed groups that have really successfully organized and taken action. So we'll hear from the Kettle Lakes, we'll hear from Tarkey Heath and Rewa Fonsalker from Cornell Water Resources Institute for Rewa, and then Cortland Onondaga Federation of Kettle Lakes with Tarkey. We'll hear about the Socoit Creek from Kristen Campbell, who's with Oneida County. She's the chief planner. And we'll hear about Cayuga Lake from Liz Kreidinger, who's with Cayuga Lake Watershed Network. And lastly, we'll hear about the Limestone Creek right next door with the Manlius Watershed Stewards from William Nicholson. So with that, I'd love to welcome up Stephanie Johnson to get us started. Okay. Thank you. Okay. No, it's in the next one. The slides are just click. Okay. Yeah. To share.
Thanks. Thank you. Good morning. It's good to see so many folks here. If you were at the meeting in February, this is pretty much the same presentation I gave then. But Tess set it up perfectly. This is a little bit of an intro to see where we've been with the Onondaga Creek Watershed in terms of community outreach and planning and engagement, and where hopefully we can go and kind of take this one step further as we proceed with this idea of shared governance. So I'm with the Onondaga Environmental Institute. We were one of the lead partnering agencies in developing what was called the Onondaga Creek Conceptual Revitalization Plan. This was a document that was established, and going forward, I'll just refer to it as the OCRP. This was a document that was put together with a lot of input from the community, stakeholders, agencies within the watershed. And the overarching goal of the OCRP was to develop a community-based revitalization plan specifically for Onondaga Creek that would help ultimately guide future development in the watershed, improve water quality and habitat, not just for our enjoyment, but for the betterment of the watershed and the ecosystem itself, and then to also enhance social and economic conditions as well. So there were multiple components to the OCRP. One of the things out of the gate with community partners was really establishing and identifying what the Onondaga Creek Watershed is. So this included a lot of literature research, a lot of data-driven monitoring, technical information that helped develop fact sheets, as well as case studies of other watersheds to kind of use as a model example. And that information was used to then translate to the community and kind of educate and inform and engage the community in different ways with the watershed that perhaps they hadn't before. So there was a public education component. There were a whole slew of partners that helped lead public presentations, experiential field trips, a lot of youth education as well. And then there were a series of stakeholder and public meetings to get feedback from a whole variety of public people from the headwaters all the way down to the city to identify the goals and their perceived issues with the watershed and really distill that down into some kind of quantifiable and qualitative metrics. So there were 7 community forums that were held as part of the OCRP process. There was a stakeholder meeting, there was a government workshop, and then there were some organizational meetings. And the 2 kind of primary questions that were asked as part of the OCRP is, what is your goal, vision, or dream for the Onondaga Creek corridor? And what do you want for Onondaga Creek and its surroundings? And then also, what are your issues or concerns with the creek now and going forward? And then there were some Onondaga Creek working group meetings that happened continuously throughout that process that was meant to kind of guide and direct all of these components and then also the actual development of the document itself. So as a result of these community forums and stakeholder meetings, this was kind of, I won't go through all of this, but you can see the 3 main goals and 3 top concerns for both the community and the stakeholders. By and large, both the community and stakeholders had the same goals. Concerns were a little bit different, but recreation was number 1 for both community and stakeholders. They wanted to see improved recreation on and in the watershed. On water contact recreation was a big important goal for folks. A clean watershed. So again, not just for us, but for the fish and the critters and all of the wildlife within the watershed, including a more natural form to the creek, as folks may be familiar with in the city. If you've ever walked the creek walk, you'll see that it's a highly channelized section of stream through the city. So a lot of folks in those neighborhoods wanted to see a more naturalized system. Concerns included government, and so that kind of centered around challenges with implementing projects. Sewage issues has been a prevalent concern for folks, and then also safety, largely centered around access that kind of ties back into the channelization issue. And it largely being fenced off in a lot of places in the lower watershed. Stakeholders' concerns include funding. So how you have all these great ideas to do work in the watershed. How are we going to pay for it? Also, government politics, overcoming some of those kind of regulatory challenges, and then also the pollution issue as well. The working group meetings basically were a series of meetings where there were these large maps of the creek corridor printed out and laid across tables, and folks could identify very specific issues and areas where they'd like to see work done. These maps all kind of got compiled and shrunken and put into the OCRP to start to highlight and identify potential areas that could be maybe prioritized for some type of restoration or enhancement of some type. And we still have these maps sitting in our office. But the results of these working group meetings included these goals, these future outcomes, wishes for the future. One was water quality, a goal to achieve Class B water standards. Right now, most of the creek is Class C. So meaning it could hopefully one day be fishable and even swimmable. Support diverse wildlife, fish species. Water should be clear and attractive and free of garbage. As part of human health and safety issues, again, wanting to see safe contact with the water. In terms of ecological health and habitat, increasing riparian habitat and plant diversity, wetland habitat, native species restoration, cold water species restoration, for access, recreation, and use, trail systems, more on-water recreation, and then education, just providing more opportunities for folks to engage with the watershed, either experientially or in a classroom setting as part of youth education. So that kind of brings us to today. The OCRP was developed in 2009. So this is a document that is now more than 15 years old. Some of those community meetings happened almost 20 years ago now. So as these conversations are continuing, as Maddie and others have been organizing these conversations, it really is kind of prime time to revisit this document and think of ways that we can kind of pick it up again and carry it forward, and maybe see if there's what else we can add to it and build to it. So, you know, revisiting these community stakeholders and goals, I think it would be interesting to see how public perception has changed of the watershed and identify perhaps new goals or new concerns that folks may have with Onondaga Creek, kind of reestablish, rebuild that sense of place and stewardship among people. There's been a lot of great initiatives that are happening in the watershed, especially within the city. So again, I think the time is prime to revisit some of these things like youth education. And then, of course, building long-term sustained momentum for this. The document was published in 2009, and then it just kind of sat, right? And a lot of that went back to funding issues. And so this idea of shared governance, maybe the establishment of some type of watershed commission, is a really exciting thing in light of all the stuff that's happening. And so that's another huge part of it too. In the past 15 years, what are some of the highlights, the exciting things that have happened in the watershed as a result of the OCRP and outside of the OCRP? So highlighting all of that stuff, I think could be really exciting and interesting. And so again, creating a toolbox for communities, right? Getting folks being able to consistently engage and having those resources at hand so that we can maintain this type of momentum. And that includes, in my mind, funding pipelines and resources for municipalities and communities, and access to those important regulatory tools and connecting communities and people together. So I'm so excited that we're all here. Yeah.
Stephanie, we should mention that this was the only time in 2005 to 2009 that the Onondaga Nation was integral to the whole planning effort. It's been the only example that the nation has been continuously involved in a water quality planning project in the whole Lake cleanup. Rick Spartan, I was a facilitator from 2005 to 2008.
Yes, yeah, that's a very great point. So this was a very much so a community-wide effort from the headwaters to the lake itself, and rightfully included very much important participation by the Onondaga Nation throughout this. And so I think They also would like to see some, more work being done with the OCRP, and maybe that does involve an OCRP Part 2 kind of document as well. So I'm very excited that everybody's here to talk about this idea of shared governance for this very important and really beautiful watershed. So thank you.
Oh, no. Yeah.
Although Willy Wonka could still.
Oh. Here we go. Here we go. You're welcome. What's this case here?
There it is. Hello. Can you all hear me? All right. Okay, great. So I'm here to talk about the Kettle Lakes Association and our wonderful mural in Tully and the work we've done with the Water Resources Institute, but I have to start with the revitalization because I was on that working group for 3 years. And that's really how I came to understand the importance of getting into community, is how I learned the process, what we can do, how we can connect with community. It was through that revitalization plan process over 3 years, not only at the table with other people, in the community through those sessions, and also learning from people like Rick Smarden and Don Leopold, going in the field, learning about the plants, learning about our place, learning about the different sections of the creek and bringing that all together. It was incredible work. So revitalizing that revitalization plan is really important. And I just wanted to speak to that before going to this next part, which is the Kettle Lakes. So I do live at the headwaters of both going north, the Tully Valley. So that's why we were involved with that Onondaga Creek revitalization, but also the headwaters of the Susquehanna River Basin, looking south. So that's what this project focuses on. The Kettle Lakes is in that, where do I go here? Oh, I don't get to see it. Okay.
You can see it here, Dougie, right?
Oh, right there. Okay. I was looking up there. All right, so the Kettle Lakes, it's right at that divide. It's the hydrologic divide between those two watersheds I just spoke of. And so we're right at the moraine. Actually, Crooked Lake is perched. It's one of those perched lakes that was spoken about this morning, where it actually divides both ways. The rest of our lakes are either wholly in one watershed or the other. Most of our member lakes for the Kettle Lake, Song Lake, Crooked Lake, Tully Lake, and Little York Lake are in that southern flowing divide. So, and as was mentioned by Rick, thank you, we are on Haudenosaunee land there as well, land of the Onondaga Nation, and we work closely with the nation in all of our efforts wherever we can. So important to this conference, talking about water, we don't have municipal systems. We are rural. So around all of our lakes, we have septic systems. We've got drinking water wells that we have to drill and maintain. And so even though we're on that I-81 corridor, do we see that on this one? There we go. The I-81 corridor, you can see going north and south. It's ag land all along there. We are principally an agricultural community with some tourism. Well, back about 17 years ago, 2009, our groups formed a coalition, a federation of Kettle Lakes, if you will. We've changed our name over the years so it's not so cumbersome a name, to Kettle Lakes Association, KLA. And our lakes are small, so about 110 acres to 230 acres. I think Tully is the largest of them. We focus on water quality. So we're all sea-slap lakes. Do all of you know what a sea-slap lake is? More hands, please. CSLAP is the Citizen Science Assessment, oh, I'm saying it wrong. Anyway, it's an assessment program, and it's funded through the DEC and New York State Federation of Lake Associations, of which I'm a part of as well, also works in partnership for that. And there's 600 train volunteers across the state of New York, and we have almost 200 lakes in the program for that assessment. And so each of our lakes are involved in that. We also have watershed improvement plans, watershed management plans, and these were developed with assistance from different funding sources, including NIFWIP, New York, the Fish and Wildlife Service. And our mission is for water quality, but also for community outreach. And that's where this project comes in. We have many different partners in that effort. And we're kind of winging this. I'm sorry, Raven, I haven't had a chance to talk about this for a little while. But we work on a lot of different projects. We do go out into the community. We have events where we have guest speakers come in. The thing that we try to do is we try to bring in speakers that are of interest to the people living there. It could be about sea slaps. It could be about ticks. It could be about invasive species, anything from hemlock woolly adelgid to the wild boar that were up on Song Mountain, and USGS, they had to come, agriculture had to come in and remove them. So it's a wide variety of interests that we bring in speakers over these last few years. We also focus on art because we understand that through art, you can bring in people that would normally not be interested in the science aspect or even in the ecological aspect. But when you have scientists come in and they showcase their art and also bring in the science, it makes a difference. And over the years, I see Dr. Boyer's here. Dr. Boyer's wife, Mary Gale, came and she was looking at pictures of his cyanobacteria and was inspired to do textile art with them and photographs. And so she came and did a presentation on that. We've had Indigenous artists come over the years and show their work. What's another example? Upstate Freshwater Institute, Mary Gale Perkins came and showed her photography. There are so many more. Robin Kimmerer came and spoke, Sandra Steingraber. So you can really increase interest. And we know that by combining our efforts with art. So flooding, that's what we're here to talk about as well. In 2021, we were inundated with water, back-to-back hurricanes, Fred, Ida, from August to October, and an atmospheric river that came over the central New York area. And how many of you remember that? So again, going back, septic systems were inundated. They overwhelmed. We had bacteria going into not only the lakes, but also the drinking water wells. And so it was a real problem. But it really wasn't until then that we realized not only was it a problem then, but understanding climate change, it could be and probably will be a problem going forward. So we got together and put together a storm response plan. And that is, well, you can look at it on our website. But what it does is it gives folks an idea of what to do proactively, what to look for. We have an emergency sort of response system that actually is headed by Colleen Zawadzki over here. You want to raise your hand, Colleen? And she also mans our website. We got a website grant from Freshwater's Future that Colleen put together. And so that is available. And fortunately, we haven't had to pull that alarm since then, but it could be around the corner. Also equipped at each of our lakes are bacterial sampling bottles with chain of custody ready to go to Upstate Freshwater Institute for analysis, should that occur. Let me see. I think that's it. I'm going to turn it over to Reva.
So as Tarki and her group were doing all of this amazing work, they also got in touch with us at WRI to talk about flood awareness and increasing flood awareness at the community after all of those intense flooding events happened. The Water Resources Institute has a relatively small and relatively new program called Submerge New York, which is a statewide program to assist communities in creating flood awareness and outreach through creative media, usually visual markers and public art. We got some initial funding from FEMA to do this. Now that funding is dwindling, so we are looking for ways to keep this going. But public art, we have noticed in our work, and research has consistently proved that people appreciate, can relate to, or can access physical indicators in their environment much better than flood maps or data. And it is a very effective way to start pulling people into this conversation to then sustain longer engagement in these topics. And that's the approach that we decided to go with. How do we typically do this? So we, once a community expresses interest in participating, and then that itself is a really big step. Usually people are like, okay, public art, whatever, sounds nice, but does not align with our priorities right now. Luckily with the Kettle Lakes Association, it was not like that. They already really valued something like public art and had seen it be effective. So once a community expresses interest, we bring a group of key stakeholders together to talk about flooding concern, their concerns around environmental issues, messaging and outreach needs. We then help them find an artist, or if they already have an artist in mind, work with the artist that they have in mind. Then we engage the community again to workshop ideas, inform the artist, sort of make a community informed decision in terms of what the public art process should be. And then we either fund the final installation or help the community leverage additional funding depending on the capacity that they have. And it's gone a little bit differently in all of the places that we've worked in. I won't go into too many details, but we've done 9 projects across New York State so far. So if anybody's interested in bringing this to their community, please let me know. Project types can be anything from urban design interventions, murals, sculptures, events or performances, signages, or digital campaigns. And I'll give it back to Tarki to talk about the mural.
I think, let me just see here. Yeah, I want to start actually to talk about Brandon Lazor, because we did have an artist in mind when we started this. We had done some work with Brandon at the Everson on another project entirely. But if you don't know Brandon's work, you can actually see it up on campus at SU. He's got a mural up on the quad somewhere, but it's really stunning. And the thing about Brandon's work is, as he said, if you know my work, he tries to tell a story in different sections of his paintings. So he can do one painting, one section, but what he tends to do is break it up into 5, 7, up to 11 different sections of a mural, so that they're all around the central focus of a story, but they all tell different stories. And we felt that this would be a really good way to tell stories around our lake. And so I spoke with him and he agreed. He thought it was a great idea. So he came down and we visited the lakes. We talked to some folks around the lake, and then we got to work. For about almost a year, we started community meetings, and they were both in person and online. And we had from Tully, Little York, Homer, Preble, and the Onondaga Nation. Thank you. We're represented there at our meetings. And everybody wanted everything. What can I say? They wanted everything. They wanted the architecture. They wanted the flora. They wanted the fauna. They wanted, oh, can you just show how beautiful it is to live here, what it feels like. So it was inspiring. And there were a lot of good suggestions. So that was our concept, our scope: geography, history, ecology, and community. And there's the mural. Now it's, okay, thank you. So that's the finished mural. This is small. It's 6 feet by 4 feet. Okay, it's big. And it's sitting in a really wonderful dedicated space at the Tully Library at this point. What we arranged with, thanks to Rita and the Water Resources Institute's generous funding, we were able to purchase the digital version. So we own the rights to this painting, and we can use it as the communities want to use it. So we can go back into communities, say somebody wants to put a mural in their own library, we can do that. Colleen has an image of this mural on the side of 81 somewhere. So I don't know, maybe, the sky's the limit, I suppose. But we are, and the coloring sheets for children we're going to be doing for a festival coming up next week in Cortland County. But we're meeting with teachers, we're putting plans together for lesson plans at different grade levels, because this mural will lend itself to very simple age appropriate identifying colors, primary colors with where they are on the map. And when you're looking at this, it's not really a map because it's upside down. So you're actually, it's a bird's eye view looking south. So that's the watershed. The direction of the watershed is south. So that's the way we're looking. And you can see, you can see way at where the sun is, that's actually south. So that the Tiafneoga, west branch of the Tiafneoga travels south that way toward Little York Lake. Up at the top, actually is toward the Tully Valley, which is actually north, but at the bottom rather. And so there's Crooked Lake and Song Lake and Little York Lake and Tully Lake and the different kettle ponds like Tracy Lake and what's the one, Gatehouse Pond. So I think that's all I have to say, except there's continued outreach. Do you want to go to this
Oh,
one?
yeah. Really quickly, we also developed a story map, which is like a digital accompaniment to the mural. So like when you are looking at the mural, there's a QR code right there that someone can scan. And though the mural really invites you into the discussion, the story map digs more into all of these issues, environmental concerns and themes. It also links to existing planning efforts, existing groups that are doing work to invite people to stay engaged. It also then connects to a Google form that you can submit your concerns to, or you can ask to be connected to a practitioner that can help with those concerns. So it really is a call to action where you start engaging with the mural, but then you sort of build a pathway to longer term and more meaningful engagement.
And we'll be building on that as we get through too. We'll add more to the story map, especially as we hear feedback from classrooms and the community itself, because those dialogues are ongoing.
And I think that's it.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have anything
Oh,
to add, Colleen?
We have a bunch of resources through Submerse New York, so please scan the QR code, take a picture of the slide, and visit all of the tools and resources that we are putting together. And if you are interested in bringing Submerse to your community or interested in doing public art in your community for environmental reasons, please scan the QR code and we would love to hear from you.
Okay.
But thank
Thanks
you
for
so
your-
much. Thanks for the time.
That was lovely. Thank you so much for sharing that. Hi, I'm Kristen Campbell. I'm a chief planner with Oneida County Planning Department, and I've been there 23 years with Oneida County, and I've been working with the Sequoia Creek Basin Commission for 23 years. This is not going to be a linear story. It's an up and down and all around, and it's fun, it's exciting, and we've had some successes. So to put it in context, the Sequoia Creek Watershed, there's 11 communities in it. The creek flows through 8 of the municipalities, so they're directly impacted by the Sequoia Creek flowing into the Mohawk River. The upper portion is primarily agricultural, rural residential. The lower reaches are very urbanized, building right along the creek itself. There's no land between a car dealership and the waterway. New York DOT at one point thought it was a great idea to move a road on top of where the creek was, and then they moved the creek about 500 feet, and the creek still wants to go back there. So it's an interesting watershed. Problem is it floods a lot. There's localized flooding that will happen in certain, crossroads or, in a little neighborhood. But we've also had a lot of generalized flooding in the Mohawk Valley. So we had frequent large storms, 2011, 13, 17, 19. I always say I don't like the odd number years because that's basically what was happening to us. And the catastrophic one for Oneida County was actually in 2019. We call it the Halloween storm. It came very fast and furious. It was localized in some parts. The rain came very fast, but it just decimated people at the lower reaches. So we had a lot of flooding in residential neighborhoods with first floor being flooded. So we've noticed that there's been an increase in rainfall, wet times. Current infrastructure can't handle it. It wasn't built for the development that we have here in Oneida County.
And what was happening is communities were getting very frustrated. They were yelling. It was everybody else's fault but their own. Residents were mad because they had been cleaning up their basements, throwing things out. They're like, what are you going to do to help us? So everybody was screaming at everybody. And there was no organized solution. So it was chaotic. It was messy. It wasn't pleasant. The best way to put it, it just was not pleasant. I had a lot of late nights out at meetings when I'd rather be home with my family. So anyway, I want to talk a little bit about the Sequoia Creek Basin Intermunicipal Commission. Again, it wasn't this linear thing, and we didn't sing Kumbaya and we all got together and did a good thing. It didn't work that way. A steering committee was formed in 1997. There was a watershed study that came out, and there was a lot of great ideas that the engineers came up with. It was 5 volumes of binders at the time. There was a lot of discussion. There was no money. There wasn't any flooding at that point. There was occasional flooding, but not the catastrophic that we were seeing. So it was hard to get that momentum. They would meet and start and no one would show up. Concerns. But anyway, in 2004, though, they pushed through this. And the Sequoia Creek Basin Intermunicipal Commission was formed, and they chose an intermunicipal agreement. They're governed by bylaws. They have a monthly monetary contribution. We had hired an engineer to look at, like, what is the best solution for us? What's flexible? How do we still have control for these local governments? Do you have a board of directors? Are you a nonprofit? Do you do a stormwater utility? We looked at everything. And the group of municipalities that did sign on thought the IMA was the best flexible option for them. And 9 communities signed on to it out of the 11. We still are held under that structure, the IMA. We haven't found something better for our purposes. So the mission of the group in the end was to facilitate that intermunicipal cooperation to fix what was going on. So membership itself, they found there was a benefit to being part of it. So now we're 30 years down or 20 years down the road. They found that a small financial contribution can lead to big things. So we have what they call it the flexible funding formula. They hired an engineer for it, the 3 Fs. So members pay based on 3 things. One being the amount of land in the watershed. That's 20 or 48% approximately. Another 48% is how much land is in the 500-year floodplain in your community. And then there's acres within, full assessed value, I got that wrong. Full assessed value of the properties in the basin is 48%. 48% is the 500-year floodplain. And then the other 5% is just acreage. So we use that formula to come up. We think it works and it's fair. No one's complained about it. We set a budget. Let's say it's $50,000 that year. So everyone pays their percentage. So one town is 50% of the watershed. They pay 50% of the budget, and they actually have 50% of the problems, or the cause of 50% of the problems, you could say too. There's a small community that actually gets flooded all the time. They pay a much smaller amount, and they actually benefit probably the most. On top of the financial part, and like I said, they continue to do their financial contributions. They're not held to it, which we don't have a mechanism to force them to contribute. So that's been controversial at times. And amongst the highway superintendents and the town supervisors and mayors, they decided that if you don't contribute, we won't do work for you. That's how it works. Eventually, because we're based on the whims of the politicians at the time, it depends on who's got the stronger voice, or who really wants to participate. So sometimes we have full contribution. Other times you might have half the group, but we still continue forward. You can always come back into the fold. We'll never say you're out forever. So some communities in the beginning were sharing equipment. That was how they contributed. Members agreed that you don't have the money. Okay, share your equipment and your highway personnel. The benefit too is you have a stronger voice. As a coalition, we yelled together at our state and federal officials and county officials. And we started coordinating projects across municipal boundaries, because what was happening is town X was doing something right next to town Y. Why do you have both your highway crews there? Why don't we coordinate this better and work together? Projects don't end just at that municipal boundary. And the concerns that we were having was this flooding. And we also started applying for grants as a coalition. Like we had a plan. It wasn't town, Whitestown saying, I want to do this without talking to the village of Whitesboro, which was in the town. So we started coordinating our efforts and applying as a program, not as an individual, which is very important. So over this, 30 years of work, and this is our baby that I'm so proud of, we've turned into these little contributions to about $64 million worth of projects since 2004. And what turned into a little project is the Sequoia Creek Channel and Floodplain Restoration Program. And after that 2017 storm, that wasn't that bad, but the 19 was, we've got one of the biggest green infrastructure projects in New York State that we're basically working to keep piggybacking all the way through the watershed. We're constantly applying for grants. So this one is in the town of Whitestown in the village of Whitesboro. It started in 17 with an idea. We had an engineering study. We coordinated with state officials and county officials, and everyone sort of ponied up and got together. So it was that kumbaya moment. And it was about $4 million we secured to get it launched in the end. And between 17, it was actually completed in 2019, the first phase of it. There's 4 project areas that we're working on just in that town. Those are 1 and 2 have been constructed, 3 is in design and permitting with DEC right now, but we're now looking and piggybacking to the next community just to the south of it. So it's been very successful working together, and no one thought we could do it. So this is my favorite slide. It's not flashy or anything, but this is what I've learned over 20 odd years of working with highway superintendents and elected officials. So local officials, to get them to buy into doing a $15 million program, they have to understand the cost and benefit. It's a dollars and cents game for them. It's not because it's good for the environment or you're protecting something. It would be great that that was the reason, but it comes down to dollars and cents and those taxpayers. But you need that visionary leader. And we had that person that actually stood up. The town of Whitestown's, supervisor was very young. Maybe that was a good thing because he didn't know any better to get involved with this and said, we're going to do this. He had big dreams, but having that visionary leader is key because over the years we were really hurt by not having that leader. It's become infectious as things change. I'm seeing in another watershed group we work with, it's identifying that person that can really engage the group. Community is very important. Because we were grappling with flooding. Flooding is our big concern in the Sequoia Creek watershed. You have to engage the grassroots group early. They were spinning, yelling, screaming. So we had to engage them and give them a role and a purpose. So for us, their big concern was just buy me out of my home. I don't want to be here anymore. I can't get flooded 5 times in 4 years. I'm done with this. We had been denied FEMA funding. So we looked for different options to get funding for these residents. And we did find it through the USDA. And we've got a $24 million buyout program right now that will be purchasing about 150 homes in the village. And it took time, but what we did with those residents that were knocking on doors, literally at different government officials, and we said, you know what, let's go door to door and see if you guys are even interested. So I created a survey, they went door to door, got information, took pictures, and this is the stuff that we use this data to give to the USDA to show what had occurred and interest. So it was very useful to engage them and have them as part of the process. One thing my chairperson does that I hated in the beginning, especially after a flooding event, because there'd be 3 people at our meeting, then all of a sudden you have 100 people very angry showing up at a regular meeting. So my chairperson always offers them a place to vent. So we have a monthly meeting because what was happening is community residents would be going to their regular town board meeting, village board meeting. Nothing would get done locally because everyone would be yelling at their local officials and no other business was getting done, plowing your road or paying for bills. So we started telling people, come to our meeting and yell at us. Good and bad, but it gave them a place to vent and talk and commiserate, and she needed some thick skin. But I think in the end, it was a very great thing that happened. And even now, when there's events that happen, they come to the Sequoia Creek Basin Commission to vent, not to their town. So the other thing is coordination and communication that we have with state, federal, and local governments. We have a monthly call with all elected officials on the different levels to strategize what we're doing. They know that this town's doing X and DOT might be replacing a bridge. And how do we make that work together? Like the pieces, because believe it or not, nobody really talks to each other. They just don't. But that monthly call we've been doing since 2016 has been very key. And staffing. And I would say that Oneida County has done a good thing by allowing me to be that consistent thing for the commission. If there isn't staffing, it's very hard for local officials to do one of these commissions. It's a full-time job. So you need someone to organize the meeting, take minutes, communicate. So I'm sort of that person that sends people to all the different directions. So staffing is very important. And the other thing I have to say for our county, we were lucky. The county executive, after one of the floods, said, here's $2 million a year for the next 5 years for communities to use as funding to match state and federal grants. So it helped studies, it helped projects, it just got things rolling. And in the end, it's a lot of money, but it's not, because that $10 million probably got us $90 million worth of funding around the county. So, it was a great thing. It's that thing that was a hurdle in the beginning, is finding that financial source. So that's Sequoia Creek in a nutshell. Yep.
Hi, everyone. My name is Liz Kreidinger. Thank you so much to Tess and Maddie for inviting me to participate in this session today. I am the steward and executive director of the Cayuga Lake Watershed Network. Cayuga Lake Watershed Network is now 28 years old. We are a independent nonprofit organization supported by individuals, families, businesses, and partners throughout the watershed. Our organization was officially founded in 1998, but the momentum to get it started really began in 1996 following the Environmental Clean Air, Clean Water Bond Act of that year. I know that folks the following year began to informally organize. There was the first, Neighbors Around Cayuga Lake mini conference, coordinated with support from local counties and the Finger Lakes, Lake Ontario, FLOPA, Watershed, yeah. I'll forget that acronym for today. And that started growing. There was interest from, our first chairs from Cornell University and the Montezuma Preserve up at the north end of the lake. And the momentum really started not just for our organization, but for a sister organization, which is the Cayuga Lake Watershed Intermunicipal Organization, which is quite similar to what you were just hearing about from Kristen. So the founders and everyone since has recognized that there's this really great challenge and opportunity of protecting Cayuga Lake. We work in an 870 square mile area. It covers 7 counties, 50 municipalities, 95 miles of lakeshore, and at this point, almost 140,000 people. There's a lot of, differing and shared values and interests in the health of the lake. My favorite thing about working in this role now is that water quality and water protection can really bring folks together who are not currently aligned on other issues. It's really, really rewarding to be working in this space and seeing water as this regional unifier. Not to say there aren't challenges along the way. But one of the guiding documents for the Cayuga Lake Watershed I wanted to mention is just this restoration and protection plans. So the development of the RPP, the first version was in 2001, led by the creation of that sister organization, our Intermunicipal Watershed Partners. And then more recently, there was a 2017 update, which I know we were talking about, the span at which these things get updated. It's a ton of work. But I am proud that our organization was able to participate in 2017 in the update of the RPP and really bring in additional community stakeholder involvement. Some aspects that were brought in at that point that weren't a focus in the original RPP include climate change. There's much more interest in invasive species management, and also recognition of the Gayagohono Cayuga Nation as a stakeholder in the watershed, which, you know, there's so much more work to do there, but it was important to make that progress. So our work today kind of falls into 4 areas: communications and outreach. So we have several core communications platforms, both print and online. We're pretty active on social media. We are a staff team of 2. So in this large area with all these different issues that come up all the time, you know, always wishing we had more capacity, but we work hard to get information out there. We do print newsletters. I actually brought a few copies of our 25th anniversary newsletter. If folks want to check that out, that gives sort of a reflection on where the organization has been and where it was as of a few years ago when we had that milestone. And then we do, of course, like many of you, a lot of in-person outreach at community events to get out and reach different stakeholder groups. We also do a significant amount of liaison networking and leadership activity. That a lot of times looks like committee and coalition service. So whether it's serving on our county water quality coordinating committees, or looking upwards to things like the Finger Lakes Regional Watershed Alliance, which I can comment on in a little bit, or participating in some of the other watershed organizations or lake relevant groups around the lake. We try to show up in those different spaces. And we're, you know, moving our mission of advocating for the health of Cayuga Lake in those spaces, and then also doing that in different decision-making spaces. So that can mean more and more that we're in conversation with state representatives on issues of policy that are relevant to our watershed. And we're getting, I think, as an organization, last few years, a little bit more bold and informed, and recognizing that we need to be at those tables more and more at the state level. So that's very exciting. The core, the beef of the work that we do is really community education and engagement. This has been sort of the tenet, the founding principle. It's the basis of most of our programming, whether it's watershed conferences, bringing in experts to meet with the community, running workshops on specific topics, the Lake Friendly Living Program, which I'll talk a little bit more about later, doing watershed cleanups as an opportunity to reach new folks and bring them into the conversation about watersheds. People love a cleanup. It feels good. It's great for me doing this environmental work that is sometimes so frustrating, and it's the long view to like actually just get out there and clean up a dang ditch, because there are waterways too, right? We know Rebecca Schneider will teach you that if you've ever been to one of her talks. So we do that cleanup work, and then also a lot of invasive species programming. Finally, the next area of our work is water quality monitoring, science and action. So we are a collaborator on the Cayuga Lake HABS monitoring program, which is led by our partners at the Community Science Institute. You know, when HABS started occurring more and more on Cayuga Lake and the community was interested and concerned, there was this natural opportunity for them with their laboratory capacities and us with our membership base around the lake to get together and get folks to begin monitoring. Now we provide all that data to the New York State DEC for NIHABS. And I think there's almost 100 volunteers at this point, which is really exciting. And I'm grateful every day that I'm not the HABS coordinating volunteer monitor. Someone else can handle that. But the data is really important for us and building awareness around the watershed. We also sponsor the Cayuga Lake CSLAP, Citizen Statewide Lake Assessment Program sites. We have 4, which is kind of unique, but that's ongoing. We have sponsored tributary nutrient studies. So most recently with Mike Schumer and Hyatt Green at ESF, we've been able to move forward with a microbial source tracking project, combining ongoing nutrient sampling that volunteers were doing with that MST analysis to try to say, okay, which of these catchments really, which sources are driving nutrient loading in these catchments, and how can we now work with managers productively to help drive resources into those areas of the watershed. And most recently, in response, to the recommendations of a lot of the clean water plans that have been finalized for Cayuga Lake and the HABs Action Plan, we're really embracing our role as a nonprofit to harness local neighbor dollars to leverage additional state funding. So we've recently launched a program called Friends of Cayuga Lake, where we are fundraising from folks who, may have the resources, but not the project on their land, so that we can help neighbors, through their work with the Soil and Water Conservation District. If they have a really bad erosion site on their property and are not able to put up that 10–20% match, we can help fill the gap. So that's something I'm most excited about right now. And then we also do issues research and response. This is the one you can never quite plan for. And our base workload is all these programs, and then out of left field, a data center is, proposed on your lakeshore, and it takes a lot of time and energy to understand these issues when they come up and respond on behalf of the communities in the lake. So it's not boring ever. And so, yeah, here's just like the ecosystem of organizations that we're working with. Watershed governance is not like a delicious layer cake. It's more like a pile of cookies. Some cookies are big and some cookies are small, and they're all overlapping, and it's quite complicated. And I'd say, as someone who came into this about 4 years ago, getting oriented to this environment of stakeholders is one of the most challenging aspects, and understanding who to talk to for what purpose. But that's why we're called a network, right? Cayuga Lake Watershed Network is based, in this value that it takes a network to protect a watershed. And these relationships are key to doing that. So, you have everyone in here from the state and federal agencies to research partners, both at universities or private laboratories. You've got, the regional land trusts. You've got organizations like Discover Cayuga Lake that run the education and community boat on our lake. And then, of course, there's like activist organizations and grassroots coalitions, some which are consistent, like Cayuga Lake Environmental Action Now, which is a formal organization, and some which will come together around an issue, and disband as needed. And those groups also have a really important role in watershed governance, because they can act in ways that maybe more established organizations can't always act. So that is the pile of cookies. And I just want to pivot a little bit to zoom out and look at our watershed region in the Finger Lakes. So I'm really proud to recently have stepped into the role of chair for the Finger Lakes Regional Watershed Alliance. This group was founded in 2010, recognizing that there was a lot of value to be had in resource and information sharing across the Finger Lakes, that we could develop a collective regional voice and find opportunities for shared issue advocacy. So here that is. One of the most recent wins for us is that it is hard to bring a coalition of organizations together. You have volunteers from different lake and watershed groups, or staff members who are already deeply dedicated to that lake and watershed which they are serving. And so to get them, folks to show up and represent the region is really exciting. So this year, in coordination and with a lot of resource support from the Finger Lakes Land Trust, we were able to go to Albany and host the first Finger Lakes Regional Finger Lakes Advocacy Day. And that was really focused on communicating the importance of EPF dollars to our representatives, and educating them on examples of the projects that funding can leverage, and our commitment to that in the communities, and requesting that that those lines be protected in the state budget. Another activity of the Regional Watershed Alliance and the members of those groups are that for each lake and watershed, we have a lake-friendly living program. So this was identified as something we were all doing, right? We're all talking about how residents and community members can take actions every day on their properties to protect their lake. Wouldn't it be great if we just all had a coordinated campaign about that? We could share resources and not be reinventing the wheel for each lake. So this was a bit before my time that a lot of this material was developed. But now we do have this regional watershed coalition. And each of the groups has been able to develop their own handbooks and outreach materials, but there's, you know, shared branding and a lot of shared messaging. And it's now being, you know, recognized with proclamations at the state, which is really great. So this is Lake Friendly Living Awareness Month. Right now, you're going to see a lot of events across the Finger Lakes for Lake Friendly Living for community members to attend. Anything else about Lake Friendly Living, Frank? Okay. Sweet. So that's it for my spiel. I'm happy to answer questions a little bit later about any of this, but please stay connected to what our organization is up to. This is the contact information for our socials and my address. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Liz. Okay, and then we are rounding it out with the Limestone Creek.
Yeah. Awesome. We good? Hello, everybody. It's very exciting to be here. I'm William Nicholson. I'm the Manlius Town Councilor, and I am the bronze medalist here because our other two, gold and silver, could not present today. So I am one of those infamous elected local officials. I am not a scientist. By day, I work in social services. And so why am I here? Well, because, you know, watershed management or mismanagement disproportionately affects our lower income people, obviously. So this is pertinent to us. We're really here, we came with a poster project and our presentation is really about one specific activity we undertook, a survey project, but I feel it necessary to give a little origin story. And also I'm really, really delighted to get a sense here today with all of you. There's such parallel interests with every group that has presented. But we, as the Manlius Watershed stewards, comparatively are about 5 minutes old. So I just wanted to let you know that the town of Manlius undertook its first comprehensive planning beginning in 2020. And for 3 years, for 2021 to July of 2023, implemented a very robust and aggressive public participation to generate its land use plan, its comprehensive plan, which in addition to being a land use plan is really a substantive vision and values document for how the future should look within this town boundary. And one of the themes that came out of that process, which I was partaking of at the time, was really consistent issues around stormwater mismanagement, flooded basements, the typical issues. And so throughout the comprehensive planning process, there were a couple of subcommittees that met, and one of them was a stormwater working group. And one of the output recommendations of that was that why doesn't this town, with all of these pertinent needs, have some form of citizen or community science group to help inform and educate people? And thus, in July of 2023, the Manlius Watershed Stewards was born as a committee of the town. And again, with our, mission to promote watershed health and resilience through education, outreach, and community science. But what happened first as a part of its origin was we instituted sort of a web contact form through the town, and immediately we're hit with just a bunch of reactive, complaints. There's water in my basement. Come look at this, come look at that, which really helped us to focus our efforts on the community outreach and education piece, and who should we pull in as presenters, who should we pull in, and what should we provide to the community. And I will say, as a 80s child, it's never a wrong time for an A-team reference. So I refer to us as a ragtag band of misfits who have no budget. So we are very effective in our education outreach part. Our community science efforts, we have won a couple of grants to do studies on problem areas that were identified within the watershed. And those are useful, but those are really just studies. And so on the municipal side, where we come in, is we can, of course, apply for funding to actually do the work. But right now we have before Onondaga County through the Blueways and Greenways program, a proposal that will actually provide us with a working budget to make good on a lot of our good ideas that have come from our community over the next 2 to 3 years. So here is our part of the Onondaga Lake Watershed, Limestone Creek and its tributaries. I want to mention that, you know, part of what we do is collaborate with other organizations and groups, just like everyone else here. But one thing that I find is unique about our situation, and part of what generated the study and the project that I'm going to talk about in a second, is that the lack of a real tangible and obvious center to the issues for people to focus on, like a lake. You know, we don't really have that. We have the Limestone Creek and its tributaries that run through the town, which generate a lot of problems for folks. And so part of our survey project, which I'll talk about in a moment, well, here we are, is to sort of help understand and quantify a value to living in a watershed, you know, as opposed to just what are the issues and problems that go with it. And, you know, are you, God forbid, in the FEMA flood zone and need insurance and can't afford it? So to the study, we wanted to know, you know, we didn't want to goose the results and we didn't want to advertise and bring people. We wanted a point in time response to what are people getting out of the tributaries and the creeks and the cool things that we feel are assets about the watershed that which we all reside. So we partnered with a Maxwell student as part of the Community Link program. So we got him to work on his project with us. We developed a survey and then we put a QR code so people could take the survey at the location they were going to. And we just wanted to know, what brings you here? Where are you coming from? What do you like about being here? What do you do? And then on the right was an example of the previously mentioned complaint form. I hate to say it, but this was kind of our starting point for interacting with the community once we were a formed committee of the town. So, you know, what's going on? And a lot of it was, again, just mismanaged stormwater issues. And again, going back, you know, so Manlius has also the unique, town of Manlius has the unique characteristic of encompassing 3 separate incorporated villages. So that creates its own complexities. But on the town level, you know, going back decades, it was significantly more agricultural. And so over the past several decades, there have been various types of development, wise and unwise. And so a lot of what was coming through was really kind of reporting on known issues and known problems with mismanaged development of the past 20 to 30 years. So part of the education piece, again, you know, we immediately, hi, Emily, one of our favorites, you know, pulled in people and provided some free educational opportunities for folks, again, generated from what the public told us, you know, in surveys, what we thought would be useful. And they have been really well attended. On the outreach side, here's some photos from one of our creek activities. And this is in the village of Fayetteville, kind of a lot of people who don't live in the town are oriented by, if I say Target, you know exactly where we are, center of Fayetteville. Limestone Creek runs right through there. We partner with everybody we can. Trout Unlimited, these are, well, you can read them yourself. And Patrick with CNY Land Trust. Again, my sense of responsibility here is to leverage my role as an elected official to provide the public and all interested parties with really the means to make good on the good ideas that they generate. And I appreciate previous presenters mentioning of it does take somebody in political leadership to actually believe in what you're doing and to see it through. Oh boy, I flew through that. I thought we were going to talk about the actual survey results in the slides. Okay. I didn't put together the slides, sorry. Well, I will say, so in a town of 34,000 people, we did get a response rate of, we got about 188, 189 responses, which I know sounds low, but that's actually pretty good engagement for a municipal survey. And I was particularly interested, like I said, about who's coming from outside the district to come here and where are they particularly going. And no surprise, folks were going to the obvious and well-marked and easily accessible parts of our study area, which were, near, there's a park in the village of Fayetteville, which is easy access to the creek. And again, to me, that kind of highlights why we're doing what we're doing, to try and help apply a tangible, quantifiable value to living in a watershed and what are the assets that it brings to your life and lifestyle, instead of just what are the costs and risks. So what we found, I think the general responses were, I come here to walk my dog, have some serenity with nature, which of course, excellent choice. The only complaints were other people's and their dogs. Just kidding. I'm a politician, so that's my life. Yelling at me from both sides. And I think, again, we weren't surprised by the lack of, the lower responses from sort of the more hyper locally known access points, because we all know where they are. They're public lands, but they're not well marked. They're not well advertised. And that's kind of a local tension. There are neighbors and people who don't want to advertise the nice amenities in their backyard. So I guess with that, I'll wait for the panel to take any other questions on it. But appreciate having me.
Well, we'll invite all the speakers to come up to join us for a panel. And while they're coming up, I think we have about 20 minutes to and instead of me coming up with questions, since we only have 20 minutes, I think we'll just open it up for the audience to ask questions and we'll fill in as needed. Does that sound okay?
Let's be friends.
Yeah. And I can say I'm so inspired by these presentations and I'm like, how do we do this here? So thank you all. Do we need another chair?
Just trying
This one.
Yes.
Okay. So thank you. Yeah.
So back in the day, we worked on the Onondaga Creek Watershed plan. We looked at intermunicipal agreements. And there was, we only could find a few examples in New York State for communities that actually done this. We found getting people together, working across jurisdictions, right? Especially for larger planning might be a good idea. So we included it in the report, though we never did anything with it. So I'm especially interested in Kristen. Reaction. Was it difficult to implement? What were the major issues? What are the potential?
It was, I wouldn't say it was easy. We hired an engineer actually to look at the different options. In the end, no one wanted to be tied down or liable for something that broke. That was one of the things in the intermunicipal agreement. If the town of Paris worked in the town of New Hartford and something went wrong, am I going to be liable for it? Am I going to be stuck paying for something on someone's private property? So the agreement itself, it took a lot of negotiating and it took some successes for everyone to sign on to it. Some weren't believers in the agreement. Some were worried that, well, you're going to cost me a lot of money. But it was laid out and it was flexible enough. So as long as we keep it flexible, they were willing to do it. It was a leap of faith. So there was 5 that initially signed on till we got the other 4. It took a few more years for the naysayers to jump on.
And just contribute real quick. I work for Onondaga County and I coordinate intermunicipal agreements for our CNY Stormwater Coalition, of which we have like 25 participating members, one which is us. But even when you have complete buy-in, just the nuts and bolts of keeping those agreements active is really difficult. I mean, by the time I get everybody to sign on to theirs, I'm going to be working on the next round of renewals. It can be really difficult too.
And you'll get a new town supervisor. And it's always a revolving door too. Sometimes you have to we did a road show, believe it or not. My kids were really young at the time, and so a lot of nights out. But my chairperson went to every single town and village in the watershed with me. And we did a road show saying why this was beneficial, what it would cost you, what the implications of joining this group are, and how you'd benefit from it. And it did get us some of those stragglers that weren't believers in the beginning. But it was, and we're actually talking about doing it again because we do have some new faces. And we haven't, I hate to say it, we haven't had a good flood in a while. That gets people, like, some people won't show up for years, then all of a sudden, there gets to be a little water in their road and that town's there going, what are you doing for me? So, but we noticed that we do have that ebb and flow. And we do need to go back out again and keep it fresh and re-engage the elected officials.
I noticed, did you also have IMA in your? Did you have any? The intermunicipality agreement?
Oh, our intermunicipal organization, is membership based. They have a fee that they also have like an interesting scale based on population and size and area in the watershed. Is that okay?
Yeah.
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 So I live in Potsdam, New York, and we have the Racket River flows back to us, which is a very huge watershed with lots of municipalities. But our whole town and village is interested and working towards signing a rights of river law. And we've been working with an advocate from the St. Petersburg Hawk Tribe, and so it's a very different approach, and it would come up right that then it's law. We don't worry about these agreements, but it's turning out the whole watershed. I'm just wondering if anybody else have thought about that or been successful in creating a legal something that gives the river a right to exist in its own ecological right.
Not exactly. We have been engaged in, well, we've been consulting with our neighboring town in Casanova, which has a lake and has pretty well-developed watershed protection planning and have modified their land use code. And we have been working as a study group of our own to advise the town and modify local land use codes to be more specific and more pertinent to the risks and hazards to our watershed. It's interesting because again, there's tensions with developers, and one thing I have definitely learned is that Americans do not like being told what they can and can't do with their private property. So, we're developing land use code that is in excess of what, EDC requires, somewhat of a pollution prevention plan and whatnot. And so, creating riparian buffer zones for the tributaries of our town is something that we work with Casanova and their planning department to sort of model. Again, we're 5 minutes old as a group, and I'm shepherding this stuff through with the help of our committee, but that is something we're doing. And then another thing, and again, it's not law, but it's supporting what legislators can do, is we have offered to our neighboring MS4 regulated communities to provide our support with the education and public outreach piece of their municipal storm sewer system obligations. And it has been pertinent. We've shown up at village planning board meetings to articulate why they really need to think twice about approving this car wash, at this sensitive location. Aha, nobody thought about that. Did anybody know there's such a thing as, pervious pavement options? So we're kind of providing that value to them. And I love this session because I'm learning ways to perhaps monetize that.
We actually did similar. We did an analysis of the zoning along the main stem of the Sequoia Creek, because we have town of Whitestown, multiple villages, each one has their own zoning. So what we did is said, you're complaining about flooding, but you've zoned it all manufacturing along that stretch and commercial. So what did you think was going to happen? So we did education, looking at it as a watershed, the zoning, sort of a unified map. But then we gave them model laws that they can incorporate locally. So it was an overlay district. So start amending the zoning in some way, maybe not the existing district itself, if they didn't feel comfortable, but you could do an overlay on specific areas. So that's how we sort of legislate it. Because you're flood, but you have it zoned for things that are very noxious, like it didn't make sense.
Just quickly addressing the rights of the river question. This is not a New York State case study, but I know there's other states that have done it, and I have a list of resources somewhere that I can definitely bring to you. And I know Pace University has done a lot of work on rights of riparian areas. So not rivers specifically, but like sort of the areas around it. And I can also find that and definitely send you. Are you working with Talking Rivers by any chance?
Yeah.
That's the group. I thought so. I've met them and they're amazing.
Yeah.
Maybe directed at Liz, but also for anyone related to intermunicipal organizations. Is anyone having conversations? I know around this coming we've got wonderful land trusts, Sunshine Land Trust, Finger Lakes Land Trust that are large swaths of land, and putting things in conservation easement. Thinking about as you're doing these watershed improvement projects. I think that the DEC's WQIP project calls for like 20 years of, operations, maintenance, monitoring, whatever you want to call it. Soil Water Conservation District might have a 10-year landowner agreement, but is anyone looking at putting these projects into easement? And is that a role like the intermunicipal organization could play to hold it similar to like, I think of the Catskill Watershed Corporation as a local development corporation. Is there a vision for the future to see, can we protect these investments and improvements through these mechanisms? Where are those conversations going? That's kind of the next step, and is that the Cadillac to go for? But just curious if anyone's having those conversations in their linked communities and watershed.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. That's such a good question. I mean, I think about this all the time, just as we were scoping out a potential project with soil and water on a farm to help do some matching funds for a riparian project and creating a new buffer. Maintenance and the long-term viability of that is certainly on my mind as someone, an organization that's contributing to that project. Finger Lakes Land Trust does easements in different cases. I don't think that our, I think the municipalities could do something like that, but our intermunicipal organization and the Cuba Lake Watershed Network at this point just don't have the capacity to hold those sorts of arrangements and agreements. It's like outside of our technical scope. So yeah, there's just a challenge there to be met. And I think that's where partner organizations would be asked to get more involved.
We're not exactly doing that, but what we are engaged in conversations about is revising and defining more areas of our town as critical environmental areas. To start.
Yeah.
I'm curious about this hot button topic. I'm wondering how we promote stewardship on our lakefront properties and also the watershed in general, which ultimately affects water quality with short-term rentals that are burgeoning in growth and being gobbled up by out-of-state, out-of-country sometimes corporations that see the lucrative nature of it. And how do we balance the governance part of it with the understanding of stewardship and the desire to protect our land, and also the awareness of the dangers like I have if you're from New York City and you've never swam in one and you're not in the beach where it's going to be public information. So I'm just wondering how you balance that and what are we doing to promote that?
Well, we have in our little town of Preble had quite the controversy on this very subject. I don't have an answer. I can just add to how complex it is because you have neighbors with competing interests. We are private lakes predominantly, so the people that have their homes on the lakes, they may be newcomers or they may have been there for a long time. But that is, as Colleen has suggested, it's a real conflict of interests. And as much as we do education and outreach about those issues, HABs, invasive species, which we have been doing since 2009 in the community, people are well aware of the issues, but some people do not care because their interest is they want to make a profit on the home where they are, and they feel they have a right to. So our little town of Preble was taken to court because we did put in a law, and the town got sued. They lost the suit, and I won't get into it, but it's a small town. Everybody knows everybody, including the judge, who made the decision. So we'll leave it there. It's not an end to the problem, but the problem's gonna continue, and it's tough in a small community. Because it, as I said, it's neighbors against neighbors. I don't know how to address that. I think municipalities have some edge when you've got, the Consumers Bureau involved, and you may have hotels, you may have other interests that can come on top of individual home issues and say, look, you're competing with us for tourism. And so they might be able to shut them down, like I think Frank, they did in Skinny Atlas. Is that true? Spencer? In Skinny Atlas, didn't they make a ruling on those short-term rentals?
In the village,
Yeah,
they're not allowed.
correct. So
Yeah.
some places can ban them, but putting in the regulations, then there's code enforcement. So small place like ours, we don't have police. We don't have anyone, our code enforcement officer goes to 3 different towns. So there would be no code enforcement. So thank you for bringing it up, Colleen. I don't have an answer, but I do know it's a big issue.
I certainly have an opinion on it. I mean, we as a town dealt with the short-term rental question in years prior and took a pretty conservative approach and allowed permitting for a very small number to see what would happen. And again, we're not talking about, lakefront cottages or anything, but the geography of where I'm a legislator. But what I would say my opinion on it is that the key is to not be bamboozled by conversations about what the need for housing is in your community. Do the research and find out exactly who is impacted by the so-called housing crisis and address those issues. And don't get bamboozled into an argument that, we need to develop all housing, it's for grandma, when really the issue is you want to make passive income off your property. So it takes people paying attention to the fine print details.
Thank you. Emily?
Yes, thank you all for this wonderful presentation and you're all very insightful. My question, builds on the idea of rights of nature and one of the presentations, I think it's on Sequoia Creek, where you talked about understanding costs and benefits. So my question is, have you considered how system service valuation can help communicate the benefits of nature conservation to help guide decision making?
So fish was a bad word for the Sequoia Creek members. It wasn't about ecosystem protection. It was always about flooding with them. What I would do is go after grant funding that had that secondary benefit. It's funny because there has been habitat enhancement with our project near in the town of Whitestown, the floodplain restoration near the CSX bridge and the Sequoia Creek before it enters the mall town. So as soon as we put in I think it's an 11-acre flood bench and, native plants and there's piers for that to collect debris. All of a sudden we're seeing herons and eagles. And so the benefit's there, but it wasn't what sold it to get the project done. But they like it now. If that makes any sense. And it's actually funny, we're actually working with an engineer right now, on a park that actually floods, and actually 2 parks. So we're looking to do recreational enhancements, but we're making them flood benches, and then we're gonna try and do trails so that actually the parks can flood, and do some kind of like benching, and then connect to the greater, what's called the Ray Hill Trail, a greater trail system throughout our community. So that's sort of like where we're starting to move to, is I think they bought into the whole green infrastructure construction project, because that was a sell too. They all wanted to hog out the creek. That was fun. And we'll take a fine later. And now they're like, oh, this is actually working what we're doing. Like, we're not seeing flooding along our commercial corridors. And, all of a sudden we had that eureka moment. So now we're starting to get more finesse to our projects and have those additional benefits. But it was always about the flood.
Yeah, Amy?
Yeah, so this is a bigger question, bigger issue balancing question, and I'm starting to address it. Like,
you know, our area in central New York is poised for massive development with Micron coming here. And there's going to be a lot of housing built. And we also know that in some communities, affordability truly is an issue. And yet, you know, as a environmentalist, right, but as someone who works with low income people, how do we, what are thoughts on how we balance it and how we really begin to think about evaluating? And you started to say something to that. But I'd like to hear any thoughts that people have about like how we begin to think about it, like what are the tools that we have or what are in our toolbox, or what are the tools that we need to have in our toolbox. So when you think, you know, it's policy, it's education, it's all of those things.
I'll be quick. I mean, I think we're out of time, but my experience was like authentic, actual real engagement, not just with environmental sustainability people and not just with aligned philosophically people, but really with everybody. I mean, one of the more, you know, moving and relevant engagements that we had was with a family who had been farming in our district for over 100 years, you know, and just came to us as a, you know, with the torch and pitchfork, angry at the government, you know, and met with us, and we're completely turned around and recognized that, oh, okay, you are paying attention to what I'm talking about, and tangibly we were able to kind of do something about it. There, you know, the development of the town of Manlius is kind of spread out from what were the centers, the village of Manlius, and the perimeters of it are where most of the agricultural land still remains. And so this is this homeowner / farmer had some really significant issues. And what we were able to do as a town is sort of recognize that, well, you're on the boundary with another town that we have nothing to do with. And lo and behold, both highway departments have been dumping salt on the same patch of road for decades. And so all it took was a light bulb, like we can do something about that, you know, and it solved her problem of the moment. And then, you know, so really I think that you can't just sort of tell people you're going to be trustworthy and do good things. You got to prove it. So, you know, engaging with everybody, not just folks who are kind of already aligned with your mission and purpose.
There's one person with all the tools.
Oh, yeah. I am trained as a planner, even though I don't do any planning now. I work at a university. But I will say that the Department of State has a resource called the Model Local Laws for Flood Resilience. And that has a suite of really good planning tools. So basically, how do you do high density development in areas with the least environmental impact? How do you make sure that you're, you know, saving your wetlands, protecting the buffer areas that you need, but also sort of accommodating for your growing needs? And I will also encourage checking out the Nature Conservancy's flood adaptation hierarchy, which sort of runs you through protect, accommodate, retreat, and then defend. So it provides this framework of, you know, how do you start with protecting to like then thinking about defending existing development. So like a framework of like prioritizing environmental concerns, but also accommodating your growth and development needs. I guess that's my contribution to this.
Any last comments? Yeah.
Actually, we did a housing study to find out what actual housing, what does the population want? Like, I've been doing this thing for a long time, and I was like, oh, we all need all this new housing. And then when we actually did the survey, we got like 1,200 responses out of 200,000 people in Alameda County, which is pretty good. But it was like, hold it, I want to age in place. I want a smaller house. I want to live in a community. Like, oh, that wasn't what we thought you needed. So we're trying to address, we just did a zoning guidebook to do, how do you do accessory dwelling units in a smart way? You know, maybe small houses, maybe using emerging technology for 3D print stuff. So we're looking at different alternatives. It doesn't mean you're just going to put a big housing development. So we're looking at ways to do infill in our urban area. Not everyone wants a loft apartment, which is what everyone was saying for the longest time, for 2001. But that's not reasonable. So we just did that, and see how that goes, because we estimate, our study said that we're gonna need 10,000 housing units by 2030. I'm like, I don't know how that's gonna happen.
Well, thank you all very much.